The agenda this week examined the provincial government's decision to dissolve the College of Trades. We considered who creates wealth in the global economy and heard how the Myers-Briggs psychological assessment tool came to be. The agenda's week in review begins with a look at Ontario's fall economic statement.
A fall economic statement shows the priorities of a government. And we saw rent control removed, which will only increase the cost of housing for many people.
Only on new stuff, though.
Housing is a state, well, there's such a shortage already, so they're compounding a problem. They're rolling back protections for children, actually, by pulling back the child advocate in the province of Ontario. They pulled back an income surtax on the rich. That's pretty indicative of who these people are. And these changes actually are already compounding on some of the cuts that they've already made. They've canceled the guaranteed income pilot, which actually the people of this province already invested in. So what we do, we have a government that is really set on destroying some conditions that really affect the most marginalized people, and that directly will impact our economy as well.
Mitzi Hunter.
I think that what we saw today was that the Ford government has really let people down. When you look at the picture they're painting for Ontario's GDP growth, slower growth than in the last 3 years. If you look at jobs, they're predicting that there will be less jobs in the future. Yet they're going around the province putting up billboards and bumper stickers that says that we're open for business. But really what they're saying is that we're not open for business and in fact, don't invest in Ontario. And this was not a full fiscal plan that was revealed today. In fact, it only goes to 135 days. And really, this is about how do we deepen the cuts? And they're not coming clean and telling Ontarians what they're going to lose. They're going to have tax cuts for sure, but you're going to lose services. And they haven't identified what those service cuts are.
Mike Schreiner.
Yeah, Steve, this was an attack on the checks and balances that provide accountability in government. The fact that their signature items here is to get rid of 3 independent watchdogs, the Children's Advocate, the Environmental Commissioner, and the French languages, just shows that this government doesn't want to be held accountable to people. I think the other thing we have to look at is what was telling for me is we get rid of the watchdog and the advocate for most vulnerable children, yet we give people with incomes over $300,000 a tax cut. And there was so much virtual signaling in this statement about an anti-environmental agenda, which goes to Mitzi's point that this is an anti-economic agenda. The fastest growing sector of the global economy is the clean economy. The Ford government has said we are close to that investment and job creation in Ontario.
Rosalie.
I think that there wasn't too much that would be considered overly surprising given the platform and what we've seen so far. I think that there definitely is something to be done about the overall deficit, and I think that the government deserves credit for reconciling some of the issues with the deficit that the previous government had with the auditor, the disagreement about how big that deficit actually was. But what we do know is that it's large and that we're adding to the debt every year. And I would just point out that in the US, recent tax reforms have, just in a relative sense, made Ontario less competitive and open for business. So potentially some tax reform was actually warranted there to remain competitive with the US. And in addition to that, we're really at the tail end of an economic boom, and we've been expanding for a long, long period of time. So I think that there's something to be said for tightening the belt a bit so that we can save for a rainy day, because in the event of an economic downturn, we would need to expand on services at the exact moment when there would be less revenue to do so. And so that would be a time to be adding to the debt. And so I think that both reconciling some of the disagreements with the auditor and looking at and taking a broader competitive lens, I think that there are some interesting things in there.
Okay, Angela, your take.
So I don't think we actually have a clearer picture of what the financial situation of Ontario is. And I think they've been doing kind of this sleight of hand. They've said, there's this huge deficit and we're going to need to tighten our belts. But at the same time, they cut taxes by almost the same amount as they have cut revenues or cut spending. So we're not actually in a better situation really overall.
Well, they say 500 million better.
Okay,
So far.
but on the order of the budget and the economy, when you're guessing, that's kind of a rounding error, right? Like, okay, so we're about equal. So they cut the cap and trade program, but then they also cut the stuff that was funding. They've cut the $1 increase for minimum wage workers, which would have put more money in workers' pockets and expanded the economy. That would have increased the aggregate demand of Ontario. People would be out spending that money. Instead, they're giving them a smaller tax cut. It's less than half of what they would have gotten with the minimum wage. So that not only is that not as much money for those minimum wage workers, it's less money to pay for the services that those workers need.
Let me follow up on that right now. We'll show the clip and then we'll come back and chat. Vic Fideli, it is a new tax cut. It is for those making less than $30,000 a year. They will pay no personal income tax going forward, according to Mr. Fideli, the finance minister. Here's how he unveiled it in the legislature earlier today. Sheldon, go.
Our government is introducing a new low-income individuals and families tax credit, or LIFT for short. It is one of the most generous tax cuts for low-income workers in a generation. Speaker, it will benefit 1.1 million workers.
Is that a tax cut you can get behind?
So listen, 2/3 of the people who already are under that threshold already qualify for this tax cut. So let's just put that on the table. The aggressive action that this government has taken against workers who are in that threshold, that $14 minimum wage, who were expecting that $15, he has actually removed up to $2,000 out of the pockets of those people. And that $2,000 would have been taxed to about $495, which is essentially what the tax cut that this finance minister has just bragged about. So really, I mean, Bill 47 is before the committee right now. We're listening to workers. They're concerned about the impact of losing the wages on their health. There's an overall lack of productivity when you actually have workers that can't get full-time work. Bill 47 will create a part-time economy in the province of Ontario. So you have, this government is a walking contradiction. On one hand, they say that they care about the economy, and then they bring in measures that will actually compromise revenue to the province and compromise confidence in our economy. So this is unprecedented. I think that we are in a little bit of uncharted territory based on how aggressive Doug Ford has been thus far in the 5 months that he's been the premier. And quite honestly, he always says, we want more money in your pocket. Well, he clearly doesn't care about those 1.8 million people who were making minimum wage, because they just lost $2,000 from their pocket.
You two guys are both in the union movement, and Tony Dean's, let's face it, pretty center-left guy. He's appointed a senator by the current Liberal government of Canada. So if a bunch of center-left people can't agree on what to do here, what possible hope is there that the Chamber of Commerce or the Board of Trade, that there's a consensus out there, a sweet spot that everybody's going to find, right? I mean, that's an issue.
But to go back to the compliance and enforcement.
Well, hang on. Who's going to answer that question?
That's an evolutionary, but that's why you...
Who is going to find the sweet... If Labour can't find the sweet spot...
There is going to be contention. There is never an alignment of interests. What you need are mediating institutions that bring those opposing views into some agreement over those issues that they do agree upon.
Apparently the college couldn't do that.
In its 5-year existence, with a new government, you could reshape it. This would have been an opportune time to put the stamp that you would like on this institution so that it could achieve the goals that this government wants and what the parties that have all agreed on some problems with the institution had with it. Have you abolish it and have no plan? That's
actually, have you
ridiculous.
talked to, you or anybody in your organization talked to the new Ford government yet about what it plans to do at the end of the day on this?
No, we haven't.
Have you, Jen?
We have, and we've had a report that we produced in 2015 that had several different recommendations, and some of which the province should take on, some of which we're asking our member employers to take on, and some of it we need to work at a municipal level and provincial level with the local school boards and guidance counselors. Right. But again, the thing we're trying to solve is capacity building. And the things we're talking about from a policy perspective is to do a better job of looking at how do we make sure we've got kids streaming into the required post-secondary for the jobs that we need. And it's how do we then make sure we've got a mechanism for the apprentice model, which we support, but for the apprentice model to be realized. So it's, again, looking at what the Ontario Colleges has done, which is looking at more back-to-back classroom, looking at different co-op programs, so you can build capacity within the existing number of experienced journey persons. But it also has to start with the business community committing, and the work that we did in 2015 to come up with that 147,000 job creation number was a lot of work. It was heavy lifting with all the members in our construction sector. But every 5 years, you should be getting labor market forecasts that say, here's where the demand is, now how do we solve for it?
When you met with government officials, did they give you any indication of a whole bunch of things? When they plan to make a decision about this, what they plan to land on, what their new solutions, if they don't like the College of Trades, what else are they going to come up with?
And in fairness to the new government, we're continuing to talk to them. We have a talent cabinet. We've been working, in fact, have been working quite closely with LIUNA on this to help work at all levels, because we've got school boards, it's the government, and it's the business community. So I wouldn't just point to the province being the only point of solving this. And this matters. Let me just talk about it for a second. What triggered this was the billions of dollars of infrastructure funding that's finally flowing into Toronto region to get our transit built. And you'll have a unifor worker at the Courtyard Marriott who lives in Mississauga who has to take 3 transit systems, $20 and an hour and a half one way to get to their job in Toronto from Mississauga. It's not a solution. So we've got to get the infrastructure built, and we've got to look at how do we create capacity across the whole. And I hear you very much in terms of we need some kind of mechanism for that, but we just didn't see the College of Trades and Apprenticeships, and our members certainly didn't see that being the right body to make it happen.
I mean, there is an irony here. I think the head of the College of Trades is a former progressive conservative cabinet minister. Is it not? Was it not Dave Tabucci? He's retired now. There we go.
Ontario achieved its position as one of the premier jurisdictions in North America. Why? Because governments invested in institutions and built them up so that they would have 5, 10, 15-year horizons. This continued pretty much up until the 1990s. What happened in the 1990s? Short-termism, sloganeering, and a destruction of those institutions that I think made Ontario the premier jurisdiction.
Which part of the 90s are you talking about? The Bob Rae part or the Mike Harris part?
It started there because it was a pendulum swing, right? It was like, I'm going to listen to my constituents and I'm going to do what's best for them to reward them. And then you had another government that swung the other way. And to some extent, I guess the Liberals tried to mediate and return to some aspect of what was normalcy in Ontario governance, but you know, it doesn't seem to stick. And today we're with another government in power that seems to make decisions by consulting with some, but not others. And I don't think that's, a progressive way forward.
Okay, we got about a minute and a half here. Ashley, let me go to you here on this. We have heard, I mean, you've heard Jan talk about the challenges to get more capacity at the end of the day. How's that going to happen?
Well, it's a tall order. That's absolutely for sure. And you know, this is not a challenge that's limited solely to skilled trades in Ontario. It's the entire labor market. We've heard from our members that 77% say that the ability to acquire and retain talent is the factor that impacts their competitiveness. So we need to be thinking about this on a much larger scale. But I think something that's critical, beyond getting the institutions right, beyond getting the process streamlined, better engaging stakeholders, is also thinking differently about the way that we promote skilled trades. Right now, unfortunately, for a lot of students and for their parents, who are their key influencers, the skilled trades are still seen as a second best choice. And that is wildly inaccurate and completely unfair. Skilled trades are great jobs and jobs that are in demand. So we need to do some myth busting, I think, at a pretty high level.
How does your new book pick up from where the last book left off?
So the last book, The Entrepreneurial State, actually had quite a bit of impact. There was policy leaders all over the world that seemed to actually be quite thirsty for that new narrative about the state doing more than just fixing market failures or, making roads and bridges and infrastructure. Because in the book, I actually talked about the state as an investor of first resort that had been required for the IT revolution, the nanotech revolution, and of course will be required for what hopefully will become the green revolution. But what struck me was that even those who sort of caught on to that message, again, this new kind of not just narrative, but theory, which can also guide policymakers on how to actually structure state institutions so they're able to take that strategic investment role, the details of the actual policies that they implemented, for example, different types of tax credits, continued to be quite problematic. And that was because they continued to be fed different stories, different requests by different parts of the economy, different actors in the economy, that by presenting themselves as wealth creators and value creators, then we're actually able to negotiate, and I would argue con, the government into implementing policies that really just increased inequality and were actually bad for innovation. And so I wanted to take a step back, and instead of talking about these, exciting things around innovation, just talk about value. Why do we actually accept so much these stories, which are really just stories about who the value creators are? I was actually quite struck, I must say, with the Labour Party in the UK when they lost the 2015 election. The self-analysis the next day by some leaders of the Labour Party was, oh, we lost because we didn't embrace the wealth creators. And I thought to myself, if a Labour Party is using the word wealth creation to mean just business, we've got a problem. Because of course business creates value. We know that. That's why we have business schools teaching them all sorts of great things around the world. But labor creates value, state institutions create value, charities increasingly create value in different areas like health and also renewable energy. And so if we don't have an understanding of this collective value creation process, we have a problem. And I'll stop in a minute, otherwise this will be a monologue. But Plato, smart guy, once said that storytellers rule the world. And for me, what the book was about was to really allow people to rethink the stories that are being told about value creation, because otherwise the 1%, 99% dynamic, which is in fact, signals who's ruling the world, will continue. It'll be very hard to change that.
Well, and as you point out in the book, one of the greatest undervalued things in the history of the world is housework, which apparently the economy doesn't put any value on, but we know that, life as we know it would shut down if people who do the housework in this world just stop doing it. Let me read an excerpt from the book, actually, as we try to reconsider value. Sheldon, put this graphic up if you would. The way the word value is used in modern economics has made it easier for value-extracting activities to masquerade as value-creating activities. And in the process, rents, unearned incomes, get confused with profits, earned income. Inequality rises and investment in the real economy falls. If the goal is to produce growth that is more innovation-led, smart growth, more inclusive and more sustainable, we need a better understanding of value to steer us. Okay, in which case, start steering us in that direction. How do you want us to rethink this notion of value?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the care work before. So if you marry your cleaner, GDP will go down, because that was actually a job that was being paid for. And now perhaps by marrying the cleaner, whether it's a man or a woman, that's, just make it gender neutral, that work might still be done, but it's not paid for. So already there, one should start thinking, oh God, wait, we have this measure which, makes GDP go down just because you marry someone. Or when we pollute, GDP actually goes up because we have to pay for that pollution. So the real issue here is prices. We are only valuing activities that have prices. Now, this actually has to do with economic thought, because the history of economic thought wasn't always like that. So you had the classical economists, who were Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Karl Marx. They actually had a theory of value which was very much tied to how production was organized. I don't know if you read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, but
too big, couldn't get through it.
Oh, yeah?
That's for you to read and tell me about rather than me to read.
There's still hope, okay. I'll read it to you if you want.
Okay.
Anyway, he focused a lot on the division of labor. So there's this famous example of the pin factory and how increasing the division of labor increased productivity, growth, et cetera. They put emphasis really on industrial labor as being the core of value. And this was, of course, the time of the Industrial Revolution, so it's not very surprising. But they also worried about things like mechanization, how to structure production in particular ways that would increase growth. So they actually had a theory of value, which ultimately transmitted also into a theory of price. Similarly with the physiocrats before them in the 1700s, during the when society was still fundamentally an agricultural society, and these were mainly French men, Quesnay and Turgot, they really did the first spreadsheet ever called the Tableau économique. They were very concerned that farm labor, which is what they thought produced value, would be structured in particular ways to increase the revenue and the produce that was being produced, and also that then the profits earned from that would be replugged back into improvements in farm labor as opposed to being siphoned off, so extracted, for just fighting wars or for dressing the king and the queen.
Catherine was the mother, Isabel was the daughter.
Yes.
And when Isabel was younger, she came up with these child-rearing personality experiments that she conducted with her daughter. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so Catherine, you know, like I said, Catherine was an extraordinary woman. She went to college at the age of 14. She graduated at the top of her class, and she married the man who graduated second. And when they left college, her parents gave her husband $200 for his postgraduate education at Johns Hopkins, and they gave her a chest of linens to decorate her new home with. And so she arrives, they moved to Washington, D.C., she arrives there, and, you know, here's an extraordinarily intelligent woman who is told that all she is capable of doing, all she's able to do, is to stay at home and raise her children. And so she has 3 of them, 2 of whom die in infancy. And with Isabel, the one who remains, she thinks, what can I do to transform motherhood into a professional occupation? How can I make it rigorous in the same way that the scientific laboratory that my husband goes to work at every day is considered rigorous? And so she comes up with what she calls the cosmic laboratory of baby training. This is, you know, maybe good advice for us as parents, right?
Taking notes.
Yeah. The cosmic laboratory of baby training, where she practices all sorts of behavioral drills with her daughter, and she rewards her with stories when she behaves well, and she punishes her by spanking her or hitting her hands when she doesn't perform up to standard. And one of the things she starts doing in her cosmic laboratory is taking on other children from the neighborhood. And eventually she wants to figure out how to design really specialized programs of study for each of these children. And she designs her first personality questionnaire, which, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, is forced choice, which means there are 2 answers to every question and you have to choose one. And they're all geared toward helping parents type their children. And so the questions are like, is your child impulsive or calm? Is he anxious or can he soothe himself? Does he sleep in his own bed or come to your bed every night?
And it's successful because she ends up writing a column, too, for a magazine about how she's raised this exceptional child, because Isabel goes on to do great things.
That's exactly right. So she becomes a kind of parenting guru in the 19-teens. And she calls herself Elizabeth Child, and she calls her daughter Suzanne. And so she becomes this model for other mothers of how to transform all of the sort of domestic drudgery of motherhood and domestic labor into something exciting and creative and professional.
While you were writing this book, you have a 10-month-old, right?
I have a 2.5-year-old and a 10-month-old, yes.
Did you find yourself applying some of the things that you found out while researching this book in your own day-to-day life?
Well, I didn't start my own cosmic laboratory. I bet I could make a lot of money doing it, though.
Because the ethics, too, of that, like using your child as a test subject, anyway.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I implemented anything with my children, but of course, the thing I was thinking about while I was writing the book was, you know, I started writing it when my first son was born, and I finished writing it when my second one was born. And I remember just writing the early chapters and looking at them and thinking, who are you? And is anything I'm doing with you, does anything I do with you matter? Or will whoever you are just kind of emerge from this sort of unresponsive little creature that requires so much care and devotion? So.
And Catherine, because I got the sense that maybe she was a little jealous of Isabel.
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, she had created this high-functioning specimen who was really outperforming her own mother. And then she left. She went to college and she started to have this more independent life. And I think her mother experienced that kind of proverbial empty nest syndrome. Yeah. You know, I think she experienced it in a much darker and more profound way.
And someone that she leaned on from before, she actually based that test on Carl Jung, on his theories on personality types. And you write that Catherine made his work eminently useful. What did Jung think of Catherine's use of his work?
Well, you know, they have a very fraught relationship. So when she discovers Psychological Types, his 1923 book, for the first time, all she does for the next 5 years is read it. and she copies every page from it out on these little 3x5 note cards. And she starts writing to him.
And he responds.
And he responds. And he responds in a way that isn't just, like he's responding to some fan's letter. He takes her questions very, very seriously. And he tries to explain to her, he tries to clarify places where there might have been misunderstandings. And then she becomes quite obsessed with him. So she creates a kind of a fantastical relationship between the two of them. And that relationship is at times sexual. She writes erotic fan fiction about him, where he has come to Washington, D.C., and she is his patient, and they're living in an apartment together and just trying really hard not to have sex with each other.
And she's married.
And she's married, yeah. Which, I mean, people fantasize, that's fine.
Yeah, but I just thought it was so interesting because those times it was such a taboo, right?
Right, of course. And she's also writing quite disappointed emails to her, oh my God. She's writing quite disappointed letters to her husband at the same time. About how he can't ever really touch her inner life in the same way that he can. So, and then she decides to start her own sort of amateur psychoanalytic practice where she is taking on young girls in the neighborhood as her clients, as her patients. And she starts writing to him about these patients that she's taken on, and she says, they're really your patients because I'm your disciple, you're my maker, she calls him. I'm speaking for you, and you're speaking through me.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, November 16th, 2018. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed. That's twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.